Welcome to Round Hill Radio, the podcast from Round Hill Community Church. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, find moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about. We talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie.
How are you?
I'm making my way into the morning. How's that?
It's a very Monday
Isn't it?
today.
I don't know why, but it is.
It is. And we are getting prepped, actually, because in 54 minutes, who's counting, we're going to do our first live stream. So I'm a little like,
hooray.
Fingers crossed this works. But the good news is I feel like there's an element of live streaming that is very much like live television. Like you kind of get what you get and like fingers crossed and we're all in it together. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Take the leap.
We'll take the leap. That's very funny you said that because last week I was participating in an online live streaming conference called Leap into Live.
Oh.
So shout out to the Leap into Live people because that was an amazing conference. So thank you for that inspiration last week. That was very fun.
Good. Sounds like it was very helpful.
It was very helpful, very encouraging, and very inspirational for sure. Today, speaking of inspiration,
yes,
I'm going to pretend that was a segue. We are talking about this wonderful book. Should we hold it up and make a thumbnail? Smile. We are talking about Art and Faith, the Theology of Making by Makoto Fujimura, as promised, as teased for weeks now. And I have sort of a meta question for you to start us off.
A meta question.
Because when I sit down to read books, I think specifically for this podcast and for, let's say, non-recreational purposes, right? When I'm reading for something, I struggle a little bit, I have to say. When I read for myself, when I read for fiction, I get completely lost in a book.
Oh, that's nice.
I mean, I just like dive in. I mean, it's like I'm not a late night person and it's like 1 a.m. and I'm still reading. Like to me, it's like this wonderful escape.
Yeah.
I feel like when I am reading for conversation, I'm a little too aware of what I'm doing. I'm a little bit like, oh, okay, this is a part I could talk about it. Oh, this is how I could talk about this part. And like I'm processing it almost prematurely.
Yep.
And as someone
makes sense.
Like I feel like, you live in books. Teach me, master. How do you do it? Because my technique needs work.
Lots of failures along the way.
Is this practice?
But, you're making me think of a little story by Frederick Buechner, who is a great writer, and I've certainly mined his books over the years for a lot of sermon illustrations and everything else. But he said, pastors, as readers, this is a particularly dodgy circumstances because he said it's like pastors who are having conversations. When pastors are having conversations, it's not just that, it's Ed having a nice dialogue with someone. It's Ed, the pastor, is back here thinking about, oh, there's Ed, the person having the conversation.
Yeah.
So it's like this double layer. And the challenge with reading as it relates to research or preparing for something is that, and actually our author for today mentions this in his book, it's the danger of usefulness. You're starting to look for useful stuff and you don't get that experience you talked about earlier of getting lost in the book.
Right. Yeah.
You're pulling things out of it and then you're thinking, oh, that could work for that sermon on November the 21st. Or that could work for that talk I have to give at such and such a place. And before you know it, you're kind of dissecting the book, which is different from reading it and relating to it and maybe enjoying it.
I was going to say it kind of does take a little bit of the enjoyment factor out of it. So I'm excited actually for we're going to have some other book club options over the coming year.
Yeah.
And so I hope to get better at this because I really want to, and I really enjoy, talking about a book after the fact.
Yeah.
But it's sort of one of those things of, and I think this is also ties really well into our conversation about making an art because when it becomes for a purpose or for a job or whatever, you lose something there.
Yeah. One of the ways I've tried to work against that and try to bring it back into the realm of enjoyment and that good lost feeling you're talking about, I read all these books with a pen. So I am constantly writing on them and underlining them. And actually, that sometimes brings me back into the book in a deeper level. So I feel like I'm more engaged. It's a real conversation going on.
Yeah.
And the other thing I do is I still copy out long passages from books by hand.
Really?
Yeah. So I think I think that's actually good from a sort of a neurological standpoint. It kind of embeds things in our memory a little bit better.
For sure.
But there's something about the writing process and the reading process that helps me to kind of bypass that utilitarian instinct.
Okay.
And maybe gets me back into the flow of the book. And then I will sometimes then, after I've read a book, I'll go back and just read the underlined passages. Say, well, what was that about that struck me at the time? And what is it about this that I want to keep a little bit? So
I think I do need to try that, although it kind of gives me like grad school flashbacks a little bit.
You might have some flashbacks, so be careful.
I gotta work on that a little bit. So let's dive in to this, because we were talking about this idea of usefulness, of purpose. And one of, I think, my favorite parts of this book is a section called The Dangers of Usefulness. And he sort of berates the Industrial Revolution as creating this culture where if it's not useful, it doesn't have value.
Right. Yep.
And it seems like his argument is that its value is in it being useless by modern standpoints. That not having a purpose is kind of the point.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful observation. He actually, fairly early on in the book, he makes this comment. He describes the first wall of resistance that the creative process runs up against is our contemporary Western cultural concept of usefulness. So he kicks it off there and starts it through. And I think that as I've looked at his art, which is so beautiful to look at, and there's a lot of it available online, which is, you're getting it second, third hand, of course, but it's still helpful to look at it. To your point, Leslie, he is elevating uselessness in a certain way. And his connection with that spiritually is that Jesus, in a sense, looks useless from the standpoint of the Roman Empire. He looks like he's a complete nobody. And then he spends his life hanging out with people who look like complete nobodies. So he's trying to draw a direct connection between how Jesus lived his life and how he makes his art. And I think that's really fascinating. And then, he redeems his art by putting it together. The broken pieces come together, which is what Jesus spent his life doing.
I had a bit of a giggle because he talks about that there's this idea of, here it is. So Emily Dickinson, with her use of dashes and hyphens that she uses a lot.
Yes.
Shout out, actually want to celebrate my friend Matthew, who gave me a book, which is all scanned images of the pieces of paper that she used to write on. So each page, this coffee table, this huge coffee table book.
Beautiful.
And each page has one small little to scale of her handwriting,
beautiful.
Which is super stunning. I digress. But he says he's argued that these unnecessary elements were her main identity, and that what may be gratuitous, and he writes the air quote extra of our world. And I had a millennial giggle because the word extra has gotten this sort of new connotation in today's society of somebody who's extra. And I self-identify as an extra person, as someone who kind of does give something probably more metaphorical glitter than it needs.
Interesting.
And
that's how the word extra.
Yeah. So someone goes above and beyond in kind of a superfluous way. Oh, you're so extra. My friend Julia calls me extra. And I'm like, yes, I am. Because that's the fun part, right? Because you get the utilitarian of a thing. And then you're like, you know what? We're going to make this beautiful.
Right.
Why? For no purpose other than 'Cause you can.
Because you can.
And it brings you joy.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Extra.
I have to say, I
It's apparently
confess,
the word of the day.
I missed that important reference to extra in our culture. So I'm glad to be
Your millennial
educated.
culture person here to help.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Glad I could help.
Well, one of the themes, so I think there's a handful of themes that run through this book, right? But one of them is make the world more beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, if I'm understanding this correctly, that's about bringing that extra.
Yeah.
Right? It's adornment, it's beautification of the world. And that's a really beautiful thought that runs right along the lines of what he quotes the English theologian and scholar N.T. Wright quite a bit in this book. And N.T. Wright has written a lot of books on the New Testament and New Testament interpretation. But I guess he's very fond of N.T. Wright's vision that one of the pathways to open up the world to more justice is by creating more beauty.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really interesting connection.
So I don't think a conversation on making an art is really complete without talking about your art. And our video viewers will see over his shoulder some wonderful art. There's actually a whole section of art here in our Round Hill Media Studios, but you can't see it because of how we have to have the cameras for COVID regulations. But we have a whole thing here just to be inspired by and give life to this space. So we could make this an entire episode unto itself. Maybe we should. But
Heaven forbid.
How did what of this book connected with you as a maker of art? Was there something in there that sort of affected your own experience of making?
Yes, I would say that's the case. I mean, I've really enjoyed reading the book, and I think one thing you said about it early on is that you really love the word making.
I do love the word making. I really do.
It's just enough different, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that you think of all the things that people make all the time.
Yeah.
Right. In our homes and at work and so on. And I really appreciated that word.
I feel like art has pressure to it.
Yes.
Like you can do a thing and then it is only art when someone says it is art.
Right.
There was a very funny time in the Round Hill Community Art Studio. I think I kind of irritated our friend Susie Simpson because I was like just kind of throwing paint on a piece of paper and I kept going, art, like every 5 minutes. And she was kind of like,
maybe
not
maybe
really,
not.
But that's, I was like, I need, like that word has so much like heft and weight.
Yeah.
And to me, just the act of making, I think, is a beautiful thing.
Yes. Yeah, I think that the word, as soon as you use the word art, somewhere back here, there's a definition, right? There's a way it's supposed to look. And that, of course, is devastating to the artistic process because, right, the thing that he says here quite often is that the artistic process is intuitive. So if it's intuitive, it's by definition, it's not following a definition. Right? It's exploring and it's making its way. And I was reading a comment the other day about the graphic designer, David Carson. This person was saying he simply brings materials to the process and then he decides intuitively about how they should go together. So that just happens in the moment. Now, it's not to say that the 1,000 things that he's done before that don't shape that decision because they do. Right. Or looking at a lot of so-called great artists over time, that shapes our decisions. But in the moment, it's still us making. And I think it's kind of a liberating word because a lot of people would think to themselves, well, I'm definitely not an artist, but yes, I make things.
Yeah.
And he's trying to democratize the word a little bit, which I think is a really helpful thing to do.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what I feel the word make is because it's anyone can make anything.
Yes.
There's a great YouTube channel called Evan and Caitlin, which is run by, shockingly, Evan and Caitlin. And they have some great merch. And there's one that just says make, fail, make, fail, make.
Oh, that's great.
And it's like and I have my phone out because I wanted to share with you this hilarious version of the artistic process, of the creative process, which is 1, this is awesome. 2, this is tricky. 3, this is terrible. 4, I am terrible. 5,
yes.
This might be okay. 6, this is awesome.
It comes back around, doesn't it?
It's cyclical. It really is. And I connect with that because every time, you literally hit a point sometimes in making where you're like, what?
Right. Absolutely.
What have I spent the past 3 hours of my time with? And you just got to get through it.
You do. And one of the things that has been really pleasurable over the years is I like to drive a piece to disaster.
Oh, I like that.
Push it all the way to disaster. You look at this and think, cannot be redeemed. No way is that coming back to life. And it's funny. At that point, it's like the mind likes to work in that zone. Like, oh, wait a second. You told me it can't be redeemed? Step out of the way. And there's then one color that's added or one image that's added. And before you know it, you think, wait a second, there's something breathing there. And it may still not work in the end, but it's not the disaster that it was.
Yeah.
And then there's always something to be learned from that can be brought back into the next piece, right? Whatever that might be. And one comment that he made here that I think is going to continue to be helpful to me. He likes to quote a lot of other poets in the book and artists, and one of them is Wendell Berry. And Wendell Berry is a farmer and a poet, lives on the land in Kentucky. He's been an amazing writer for many, many years, but he actually makes by working the land. And he said, Wendell Berry has been noted to have said that when he approaches a land, he does not ask, what can I take from the land? But instead asks the land, what do you need? And some artists approach their materials, the paints, the charcoal, whatever they're working with, and ask the question, what do you need? So it's a dialogue with the materials. And as long as you're trusting the materials and your own intuition, that's really all you need to start. But for a lot of people, that is a very difficult journey, especially if you've worked in one kind of art for a long time and in one pattern or process. Then stepping out like that will feel like just a complete disaster from the start.
Yeah.
But it's only by, as you said, you keep working on it, keep pushing through.
There's something very freeing about that. I was thinking just this morning about the sort of fear, what I've heard called the fear of the white page for authors or creatives or whatever, that you have this blank canvas or blank piece of paper and that you have to get over the fear of like ruining it.
Yes.
I was talking to my friend today and she was saying that she has this new calligraphy book for practicing calligraphy. And she's like, I don't want to do it because I don't want to mess it up with the book.
I know those pages look so nice.
And I know that the pile of notebooks I have in my home.
I can only imagine.
Beautiful notebooks. For literally the only purpose I have them is just for taking notes, but they're so pretty.
Don't mess them up.
And I don't want to mess them up, which is ridiculous because that is literally their entire point.
What you'd have to do is get a little paint out there and just splash it down.
That
will get you over that particular hurdle.
Well, I find the common denominator in my world of books is coffee stains.
Oh, yes.
You really love something when there's just a big coffee stain on it.
So here's maybe a connection between coffee stains and our artist friend.
Oh, here we go.
I don't even know how I came across this, but there's just a lot of weird stuff on the internet, but there's a lot of really cool stuff.
There is.
It's worth looking.
It's true.
I found a video, can't be more than 5 or 7 minutes long, about an artist. I think he's maybe from Hungary, but I think he lives in this country. And it's so simple. It shows him walking to his local coffee shop. It shows him sitting down with a blank notebook. Take note.
Okay.
He has a cup of tea over here. He makes sure that he keeps that tea bag in that hot water a long time.
Okay.
And then he takes the tea bag and he plunks it onto the blank page.
Oh, nice.
And then he moves it around.
Oh, fun.
And when he's done, he gets all of these little interesting images and shapes that he couldn't have created if he tried to.
Right.
But they're there because he just sort of drops the tea bag down. He then takes a brush, brings a brush with him. This must look very interesting in this coffee shop. Why is that man over there putting a brush into his tea?
Playing with his tea.
Not good. Right.
Might back away.
And of course, the tea water is actually, it may look really brown, but when you put it on the page, it gets really light.
Yeah, so sort of sepia.
Yeah. Right. And so then he just gently moves this brush around. just takes his time. And so then it shows him walking back home after he's done this. He goes into his apartment. He has sketchbook after sketchbook filled with images that he has created just from tea bags.
Oh my gosh.
It's brilliant.
I love that.
It is totally, and it's the sweetest thing. He walks very slowly. And, as he goes to the shop very slowly as he goes back home, he's very deliberate in all of his actions, but in his apartment, sort of beautifully arrayed with all these books. And I thought, this is a man he's a maker.
Yeah.
And I guess just to continue on that vein, I came across another interesting YouTube video the other day.
It's a magical place.
And I wish I could remember this man's name. He's 100 years old, an artist from Australia.
Wow.
He's been painting since he was in the Second World War, where he did artwork instead of playing cards like all of his buddies did.
Right.
He thought, what a waste of time is that? So he started artwork, went to the National School of Art. But in his description of himself, when the interviewer said, what do you do? He said, I make marks. He said, that's my life. I make marks.
I like it.
So even if he's painted something that looks like a beautiful landscape or a portrait, he would still say, I'm making marks. And I think to your point, that is much less heavy than saying, I think I'm going to make a portrait now. Because then suddenly your mind is thinking, I'm not going to get that cheek right, or I'm not going to get that hair right. And he's not worried about that.
Yeah.
He's only concerned about making marks in the best possible way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that human beings have been doing for a long, long time, right? We know that going back into the caves, right, in France and all around the world, of people have been making beautiful marks for all that time.
There's something about making an impact on your world, isn't there?
Yes. Oh, exactly.
Making where there wasn't before.
Mm-hmm.
For me, no conversation about making is complete without celebrating the work of Adam Savage, who you might know from Mythbusters.
Oh, yes.
The redhead guy from Mythbusters has become, he's had this whole sort of second career encouraging making. And you see, he does some YouTube videos where he does like one day makes and one day builds and all these things. And he has this spirit about him that I think you would very much like, where he has that beginner joy, even though he's been doing it his whole career. I mean, he worked at ILM, he's worked on Star Wars, he's done these huge television shows.
Yep.
And every time you see him, and my favorite thing is they keep it in when he messes up.
Oh, that's great.
Every
love that.
single thing they keep in.
Yeah, don't edit out
And he goes and he's like, well, here's a stupid thing I did.
Let's see what he makes of it.
And then you see what he makes of it, or you see how he fixes it, or you see if
it.
he has to start all over again. And it's so like pure and true to the making spirit of like, you're never going to keep your first version of a build.
Right.
That you expect, like, we see these things and we have these unrealistic expectations of making. And it's like, no, that's version 15 of something, or whatever. And I love that they keep in the air quote errors, because it's just, to me, that's part of the process.
Yeah.
Like that project, I always say, like, a project will take as long as the project needs to take.
Yep.
Which includes all the mess ups and all the things, because that is the process of whatever the thing is and needs to be. I tried to put a time limit on it because then I just blast through it anyways. It's never gonna, no.
Well, that kind of gives me chills, that comment. I think that that is such a transformative thought, that leave the mistakes in, see what happens with them, keep making a new beginning. I'm thinking about that song by the lyric from Leonard Cohen where he says, ring the bell that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in.
Oh, I like that.
And I think this is, our artist friend whose book we're reading, that's really all about his art. I mean, he has created this method for making art and letting the light get in the cracks.
I think that's the perfect thought to leave us on today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Roundhill Radio. I'm sure this won't be our last conversation about making.
I'm sure of it.
I'm sure of it. Thank you all so much. Roundtable Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Roundtable Community Church. We'll see you back here next week.
Blessings.